I recently narrated an audiobook called Magic.exe. I'm Andrew Reed, and I thought it would be interesting to sit down with the author, Danny Williams, and talk about how it all came together. Hello, Danny.
Hello, Andrew. How are you?
Very good, thank you. What's going on?
Well, interesting question. I'm really enjoying some of the feedback I'm having from your audiobook, and thank you very much for narrating that for me.
It was a big pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, I'll be honest, I never expected to ever publish a book, let alone get an audiobook published. So this is all a bit new to me, as I think it is to you as well, from a narrator's point of view. But it's been really fun process so far, don't you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. So if someone's never heard of Magic.exe, might you be able to describe it perhaps in one sentence?
Oh, in one sentence. Well, Magic.exe is the premise that magic is in everything, and magic comes from the minerals. And in our modern day world, the magic's maybe still there, but hidden somewhat. And that's sort of the story that Magic.exe explains and comes to the conclusion of.
Nice. So perhaps we could just talk a little bit about where the idea for Magic.exe came from and where it began.
So to explain that, I need to explain a few other things first, and forgive me if this sounds like a bit of a rant. I'm 42 years old. In the last 2 years, I've been diagnosed as being both autistic and ADHD. Which is something that came as a real surprise to me personally. I always thought myself as quirky, but then my wife and I have been struggling with things, and she asked me to get diagnosed, and I went through the process. Anyway, the long and the short of it comes down to the fact that as part of that process, I started seeing a psychiatrist. And I explained to the psychiatrist that I've got these stories up in my head that have been in my head since I was about 12 years old. And I started explaining some of these stories to him. And he said, well, why don't you try writing some of these down to clear some headspace for yourself? And it was a really insightful thing to be told, especially considering I failed English at high school. So I've had all these stories generating in my head for years and years, but I never thought I could write them down. And then when you get told this at 42 years old, it's like, oh, well, yeah, okay, I suppose. And that kind of brings you to my first book and why I wrote Magic.exe. It was the first of the stories that I came up with as a child. It's entirely based on two things. First of all, an absolute love for the late great Sir Terry Pratchett. I adore his work. I'm not comparing myself to him and never could, because who could live up to that? But I read Terry Pratchett as a child, and then one particular day I was in a high school science class, and I remember saying to my science teacher, how do the electrons know to go through that bulb? And the science teachers, as science teachers do, said, oh, well, it's the path of least resistance. Okay, so how did they know that they needed to take that path at all, let alone it being the path of least resistance? And the science teacher just got really frustrated with me. It's physics, it works, end of. But he couldn't answer it to me, really?
Yeah.
So being kind of childish and a little bit goofy, I made up the story that maybe it's magic. And then from there, I started writing this story in my head as I walked back into school. And it's just always been there, and it's always sort of compounded from there. That was quite a long explanation. I apologise.
No, that's really interesting. So would it be true to say that you've actually been writing it for over 20 years?
Easily over 20 years. Magic.exe, nobody will really understand this yet because I've not fully explained it. But Magic.exe is actually the center point of a series of books, a series of stories that I've written for myself. Because Magic.exe, as is explained by the color on the cover, it takes you from a chaotic world of magic into a more organized world of technology, but the magic's always there. So the book series, this is the center point of that book series. And books that happen before this one are all going to be in the orange book covers, and they're all going to be the chaotic magic world. Anything that happens after is the technology world. And I wrote the story in my own head, starting with this question of, is magic in the electricity, or is the electricity in magic? It's a really interesting question from my thoughts. And then I've sort of expanded it both ways from there. So what was the equivalent of electricity before magic? Or sorry, no, what was magic before electricity even? And then what could it lead to going forwards? Especially if magic maybe becomes a little bit less saddled to our technology in the blue world, and that's sort of where it's going to go eventually. I'm a long way off publishing those books yet. But yeah, I have definitely been writing these since I was 12, 14 years old, walking back into the high school that I went to with my best friend.
So Magic.exe is like the center point you mentioned. I guess it's a big milestone to have completed it. How did it feel to have finished this first or middle chapter, perhaps we should say, of your story?
You know what? It was really sort of terrifying to have this thing in my hands. And when you get that first proof copy of something that you've created, that you've put down into paper, that's a really scary idea. It's a really scary thought that I've created this thing that is now on bookshelves in bookshops. It's on the shelves in the local library. It can be, it's really strange. Considering I always call back to the idea that, well, I failed high school English, and I was always told I could never do something like this because, well, as it turns out, autistic. That's probably the reason that I failed English, because I don't pick up on emotional cues like neurotypicals do. But yeah, it's a really scary thing to have done. The encouragement, and I will call her out here, and I hope I don't embarrass her, but the encouragement point was a great friend of mine who's also a Terry Pratchett fan called Kate Burtwistle. She read the first draft of Magic.exe, and before I'd even finished it, she was saying to me, "You have to publish this. It's like we've got a young Terry Pratchett back in our midst. You have to do something with this." So I wasn't convinced that it was ever going to take off. I really wasn't. But Kate pushed me. I'm glad that she did, because from that I've got this book. I've got the next book in the series, which is on my desk here. I'm currently doing edits on. I've got about 8 or 10 other books sort of outlined that I now need to try and write. But that then just becomes even more sort of scary. And doing it all as an independent author as well means I've got no publishing house backing me. I'm doing it all off my own back. I have to pay for the copies of every book myself and then hope somebody buys it.
So you obviously love Terry Pratchett. Have you got a favourite Terry Pratchett book, or most influential?
My favourite Terry Pratchett book has to be the first one that I ever read. And I keep going back to it time and time again. It's Guards on the Discworld series. Guards is just a fantastic sort of microcosm of justice and chaos all mixed together. It is a fabulous book, and I particularly love the way that Terry Pratchett is able to describe some of his characters. The one that's always stuck in my head was the way that he described Corporal Carrot, as he is at that point. And he describes him as being called Carrot not because of his bright orange hair, but rather because of his stature and how he's much wider at the shoulders than he is at the feet. It just gives you a fantastic image of this character who's obviously depicted as being a man mountain of sorts, but as soft as anything. And I love the way that Terry was able to do that.
Brilliant. If you don't mind, if we could talk a little bit about when you got your diagnosis of autism and ADHD, if that's a topic you're up for talking about, like how that came about and how that's changed your perspective on yourself and what you're able to do, if anything.
So it really does change your perspective on things. And honestly, I'd never expected to get the diagnosis. My wife thought that I was autistic and ADHD because a friend of hers is, and I resonate with that friend very well. And my wife tried to push me for years and years to actually get the diagnosis or go down that path until I finally gave in to her, as we all should. So I started down the process not knowing what the process was going to be, not really expecting an outcome from it. And it's quite interesting talking to professionals about mindsets, which I've never done in the 40 years before I started the process. I never thought to speak to a professional about anything like my own thought patterns. I just assumed that everybody thinks the same as I do. I just assumed that everybody could hear the bulbs buzzing in the background and little things like that. Now, the process itself, I'm not going to explain because nobody needs me to explain that. But what it has meant is a big thing. And getting the ADHD medication, a lot of people are scared about getting the medication. To that, I tell people, do it, try it, go through the titration process, get the dose right. Because having that medication doesn't change my thought processes. It doesn't change my creativity. I could never have written the books, actually got them written onto the screen without having the ADHD medication. Because what they've allowed me to do is focus my energy a little bit more. They've allowed me to just say, right, I need to write this chapter today and get it done. The autistic diagnosis came after I got medicated on the ADHD pills, primarily because as the ADHD comes down a notch, some of the autistic traits become more noticeable. Mm-hmm. Not in a bad way, because, and it's funny, after I got the diagnosis, everybody in my life has said, yeah, we always knew. Oh, great. Why didn't you tell me? But what it has allowed is, because of that change in attitude of people, because people have actually said, well, yeah, we always knew that we were neurodiverse. It's, oh, great. So I can stop masking. I can be me again and just be naturally me instead of thinking, and this is something that I now know a lot of autistic and ADHD people do. Instead of walking into a scenario and playing through 1,000 options as to how I might react to somebody saying hello, instead I can now stop masking. I can just react naturally because people now know not to expect anything other than Danny's a bit quirky. And it's nice. It's relaxing, actually. It allows me to do things, do more things, because I'm not exhausted from all the masking. And that's important.
It's interesting you mentioned the friends who always had known that you were neurodiverse. That's an interesting truth. Like, it's not one of those topics that is generally open for discussion unless very close people. You're very close to someone, is it?
Yeah, exactly. And even if you are very close to somebody, you wouldn't necessarily say anything. And
No.
I don't like that taboo. At the end of the day, if you know somebody well enough that you can say, yeah, I think they might be autistic or I think they might be ADHD, why haven't you had that conversation with that friend? And it doesn't have to be a confrontational thing. It can be a really sympathetic thing to say, we all know that you're a little bit weird. We love that you're a little bit weird. Is it because you're ADHD and autistic? And are you seeking the right sort of help to make sure that you can be you and be you unapologetically?
That's really interesting. Thank you, Danny. We strayed off the book a little bit there, but I think it is interesting stuff. So bringing it back to Magic.exe, was there what was the hardest moment whilst writing it that you came to?
The hardest moment is actually ending that book. And for those who have read it, you'll know what I'm talking about when I say that it ends a little bit abruptly. For those who've listened to it as well, you'll know what I mean by that. But I kind of felt like I had to end it abruptly because anything more, if I carried on with anything more, it would have stepped on the toes of the next story in the Blue World or the first story in the Blue World. And it's funny because I've actually got on my other screen here next to me because I've been doing some writing this morning. I've got the map that I've written out for myself for the whole orange stories and blue stories. The next story in the blue books is going to be called Magic.zip. And as the technologically advanced or knowledgeable of us know, Magic.zip means that it's a zip file that might be extracted at some point. And that's sort of where that goes. Now, it was interesting because I already had that story in my head when I was writing the first one. And where do you stop before you step on the toes of that next book? And that's really difficult to know. Now, a few people have actually commented to me that the story stops and maybe it could have been a single book that was a lot bigger. And they're right. I could have written all 8 or 10 stories into a single book. They're absolutely right on that one. But that kind of steps on the toes of what the book was supposed to be. It's not supposed to be some massive tome of information for everybody that you've got to sit down for 6 months to read. If anything, it's supposed to be a bit of fun, a bit of a giggle, and short enough that you can sit and read a chapter during your lunch, or short enough that kids who are travelling back into to school can pick the book up and read a chapter during the ride to school or on the journey on holiday with the parents or whatever. That's why my chapters are always around 1,200 words, because I don't want them to be massive things that are difficult to tread through. I always enjoyed reading as a child. I want my kids to enjoy that. I want all of the kids of the future to enjoy that. And reading War and Peace, even if it's got a couple of gags in it, is still War and Peace. It's intimidating, particularly to somebody like me with my sort of mindset. A massive book that's 3 inches thick is too intimidating to pick up. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I've got some on my shelf here that I've had for years. I've never read them. So yeah, I wanted to keep this narrow, thin, quick read. And if you enjoy it, then you can pick up the next book once I've published it.
There's an accessibility thing there, isn't there? So
Definitely.
what's I mean, you've just mentioned it, but if you could just reiterate it for me, who's this book for?
It's for everyone. Absolutely everyone. Anybody who likes a bit of a giggle, that's who I've written the book for. Anybody who enjoys the likes of Douglas Adams or Terry Pratchett and wished that there was more stories from them, that's sort of who I've written it for. But I really want teenagers to pick this book up and read it and enjoy the reading process. I wrote it from an I enjoyed reading as a child, and I want them to understand that as well. I'm not saying that I can fully relate to all the teenagers of the current day. I'm an old fuddy-duddy by my own kids' standards, but there's no reason that they can't pick a book up and read it and pick up on some of the subtle little jokes that are in my books. The one that I always find funny for Magic.exe, and maybe I shouldn't explain this too much, but there's one point where there are logs, computer logs, that keep saying ribbit. I love that because it's actually a joke that goes all the way back to Alan Turing. A lot of people don't actually know this, but
Okay.
I love it. Alan Turing, as many people know, is the godfather of computers. The Enigma machine that he was trying to crack with his computer was so vast that every now and then they would come in the morning and find that a circuit had shorted out. And they didn't know why until they found out why. Literally, bugs. Flies would fly into the machine and get zapped on the machine and short out a circuit. That's where you get the term bugs in the code. I love that term. So there are no bugs in my logs because the frogs have eaten the bugs and left it with a ribbit.
Brilliant. I love it.
And okay, I get that because I particularly love Alan Turing. I particularly love some of those technical manifests from way back when. But it's just a little gag that if you know about computers, you're going to pick up on things like that. I've been writing code since I was 15, 18. I've always worked in IT. So there's a lot of those sorts of jokes that I know of from personal experience.
I was going to ask you actually, like from your professional experience in IT, does that help, or well, I suppose it must have influenced your book in some way. I know it started like earlier when you were a teenager, and it's interesting to sort of parallel actually your starting this book as a teenager, and perhaps it's going to appeal to teenagers as well. So it's kind of like a teenager read, right? Conceptually, it's sort of a teenager writing for teenagers in a way. Obviously, you're much older now, but yeah, I was just going to ask: is there a benefit in writing this piece, referring to technology and all the rest of it, and AI, from your experience and as an IT professional?
I think there is, and I'm going to refer to another author actually here. Well, he's not an author, but a celebrity of sorts. I don't know if you've ever come across a guy called Adam Savage. He was one of the Mythbusters on the old TV show. He's got his own YouTube channel, and he has published a book. The book that he's published, I'm not sure if he ghostwrote it or what, but it's called Life is What You Make of It. Now, anybody who works in IT, I really, really recommend you read this book, because what it explains is that if you write code, you are a creative. You don't think of yourself as a creative, but you are a creative because you're creating something out of nothing. You're literally writing nonsense onto a screen and generating a database or an application or whatever. And Adam Savage goes into this in quite a big detail in his book. It really hit home for me that a lot of people who work in IT are actually very creative people, but they think of themselves as not creative because all they ever do is write code.
Mm.
Now, that sort of should say a lot about the IT world and how creative the IT world is. And there's a lot of things in the IT world that I've sort of drawn out into my writing because we're usually sat behind a screen, as I am now. But we sort of interact with the world in a strange way, and we see patterns in the world that other people don't. So I was talking about Magic.zip earlier, which is going to be a book in the future. That one's basically going to be a systems audit of humanity in the technology world, which is really strange. But being autistic and working from an IT point of view, there are some things that I just don't understand in the real world that I don't think AI would understand. And what if AI did do an audit of the human world? That's sort of where that's going for that book. It should be good fun. But then there's also other things in some of my earlier books, the earlier books in the series, I should say. So the first of the orange cover books is actually called Magic Alpha Testing. It's the first incarnation of magic and how wrong it might be and how it might be misinterpreted. And anybody who works in IT has gone through this, where a alpha test hasn't been properly tested but still released into the world. And that's kind of where that's going, because they don't change it. They do their alpha testing and then suddenly it's out in the greater world, which is quite fun. And as that one takes place, I've actually got the cover here. I probably shouldn't, but there you go. So that is well and truly cavemen finding magic, which alpha testing, that's what they're doing to it. And there's a lot of those sort of gimmicky things that are going to go into my book that definitely come from my IT history.
Yeah, nice. And I do love the way that you've linked this series with, computer file extension names. That's genius. I love it. So on the next book, like you were talking about the future Magic.zip, are we going to see any characters recurring, or is that not something you can tell us yet?
Definitely going to see characters returning. Magic.zip is almost a day after the end of Magic.exe. So without wanting to spoil the end of the book of Magic.exe for people, there is a character that appears in the last chapter or two. That character is going to be the person who does the audit of humanity. She is, I'm not sure she is the right term, but I'm going to go with she for the time being. She is very autistic. Yes, there is a lot of me written into that character. And she's going to be sort of guided by Tolland and Myra, who are the only other two people who know her and who've witnessed her creation. So the whole of that book is going to be following Tolland, Myra, and Aura as they try and understand the human world together as it exists with technology.
Oh, I'm excited to read it. That sounds fun. I imagine how funny that's going to be.
Oh, it could be. It could be.
I hope so. I think so. So let's move on a little bit. For you, which character stayed with you the most?
The character that I sort of gel with most is a side character, actually. It's a character that I named Kevin the Correct. Kevin is a real random character, but he's sort of based on me. I have written a short story as to the background of Kevin the Correct, which is available through my personal subscription site. It's on Amazon if you've got Kindle Unlimited. And it explains how Kevin is a database administrator. Yes, that's me. Who sees patterns in the code Yeah, that's me. And starts to question whether those patterns should really be there, and starts to question, without knowing that there could be such a thing as magic, he starts to question, why does things happen in the way that they do? Why do phones always die after about 18 months? Why does the battery keep deciding it no longer wants to hold charge? It's not a chemical process, so what's going on with that? And he's quite funny because he doesn't understand that there is such a thing as magic, and yet he sort of comes to that conclusion. He's going to be another reoccurring character. In fact, his family line is a reoccurring family line.
Oh, right, okay.
Kevin isn't his real name. His real name is Simon Nigelson.
Okay.
That's explained in Becoming Kevin, the short story. And there is a Nigelson in every one of my books. Just because he's a funny character.
So, did the story change at all as you were writing it, or did you have that vision, had it more mapped out, and then it was just a matter of doing it?
I've always had the structure written out, but I never had some of the individual things that happen mapped out. So there is a point where Toland is trying to cast a particularly complicated spell, and I always knew that he was going to cast that spell. What I didn't know is that he was going to have to go and find Mendelevium. I didn't know that he was going to have to explore a old mage tower and a particular lock that may or may not insult him. And things like that were really interesting because I didn't know they were going to happen until I was writing them and I was rereading the chapters and trying to say, well, how do we come to that conclusion? How did we get the things that we needed to do that spell? And what exactly is Titanic titanium? It's random things like that. I don't think any writer fully plans out their stories. I think you have to allow the characters to grow naturally as you write them. And that's actually really exciting from an author's point of view.
Yeah, it must be that feeling that something's happening in front of you, but it's coming through you in a way. It's like I can't imagine.
It's really funny.
So, tell me about the narration. Why didn't you narrate it yourself?
Well, honestly, I don't like the sound of my own voice, Andrew.
What?
I am quite a monotone sort of voice. I've got a very deep voice that I've never particularly enjoyed. And I did try to narrate it myself to start with. But the first chapter, after I'd narrated it and listened back to it myself, I didn't feel like I'd done the book justice. And that's where I thought, right, I'm going to have to reach out to somebody. Andrew, you are not the first person that I clicked on. I must have gone through about 100 different voices on the Audible site before I came on to your sample voice. And I don't know, something about the way that you spoke in that sample just sort of said, yeah, this works. This is the right sort of voice for me. And honestly, you've done some fantastic work with the book. I love some of the character voices. They weren't necessarily what I had in my head, but they actually seem to work better than the voices I had in my head, which is fantastic. And I can't thank you enough for the effort that you must have put in to read the book and understand the characters to come up with those voices. It's fabulous. It really is.
Oh, I really enjoyed it. Tell me how it felt to listen back to your book for the first time.
Oh, surreal. Surreal is the only word. I've never really been an audiobook person. I prefer to actually read. But there are a few audiobooks that I've really enjoyed. Listening back to my own book through your voice actually made me enjoy the book a little bit more than when I was writing it, which seems a bit strange. It felt very surreal, and I never expected, as I said at the start, I never expected to write a book. I never expected to publish a book. I certainly never thought I'd have an audiobook. And this is all really strange and really exciting at the same time.
We're running against time a little bit, but just a couple more questions. What's the one thing about self-publishing that you think people might underestimate?
I think people underestimate how easy it can be, but at the same time, how difficult it is. You need help to do it. I've got an editor friend who's doing my editing for me. I've got a half dozen proofreaders who do my proofreading with me. I am, as I already showed you my book, I'm currently proofreading this version of this book, which I thought was done, and I've already found hundreds of things that I need to change in it. It takes a long time, but if you've got a story in you, do it. Don't worry about going traditional publishing if you don't think that you want to do that. Just get it onto Amazon KDP, the Kindle publishing platform. That will help you massively, and it is very useful.
Great. So, if there was one thing that you hope people take away from the book, what would that be?
I hope people take a bit of joy from it. That's all I want, really. There's no hidden message. There's no stay away from technology or anything like that. It's a bit of fun. It's a bit of joy. If you can take that away, then great. If you also take away from it some of the comments like, war is inherent, but we can avoid it, which is written into the book in places, fabulous. But honestly, enjoy it. That's all I really want. Enjoy the book.
Great. And before we say goodbye, before we stop, where can people find the book, and where can they find the audiobook?
So, audiobook is on Audible. It's live now. There is a link that we will share with the video. So definitely go and find that. Where can you find the book? It's on amazon.co.uk.com.au. Everything. It's also on Waterstones online. It's on Blacks online. And if you are in the Cheshire area, head into Northwich. There is a little bookshop called Cover to Cover. They are stocking the book in person. Also in Gloucestershire, there is a little book called Toadstools Bookshop, and they also have the book on shelf there. So if you prefer to get a hard copy from a real bookshop, there are two options there for you.
Brilliant. Danny, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for this. It's really interesting to hear about the book in more detail, and I love narrating it. So yeah, thank you for hiring me for that too. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much as well, Andrew. It's great to do this sort of thing. This is the first sort of author interview I've ever done, so I've been a bit nervous the whole way through. But it's been a pleasure. And working with you on the audiobook has been an absolute pleasure as well. So thank you very much for doing that.
Thank you, Danny.
Take care.
Cheers.